immutable. So you cannot derive a class from wrapper class. Wrapper classes are used to wrap primitives. So wrapper classes are similar to wrappers for your chocolate. You know, chocolate is there and then wrapper is there. So that wrapper means wrapper class and that chocolate means primitive. So wrapper classes are used to wrap primitives. In Java, wrapper classes are available for each primitive. Now you can see that list. Left hand side primitive is given and right hand side respective wrapper classes are given. How can you recognize? Byte B small, so primitive. Byte B capital, wrapper class. Wrapper class. Short, int integer. So henceforth, whenever you talk about int or integer, be specific. When you want to say, when you want to talk about primitive, say int. When you want to talk about wrapper class, say integer. Long, float, double, character, boolean. So wrapper classes are there for each primitive and their whole and sole purpose is to wrap that primitive. Now what is the purpose of wrapping primitive? Why we need to wrap primitive? That we will come to know in a next discussion. All wrapper classes are derived from java.lang.object. They all are final. They all are immutable classes. Now, why wrapper classes were introduced? Wrapper classes were introduced in the very first version of Java. What was the purpose behind that? So why wrapper classes were introduced? There's a file in A6 why wrapper classes were introduced. Earlier versions of Java, we are talking about prior to Java 5. Earlier versions of Java, suppose there was a method static void show object ref. Now what do you mean by show method has got object as a parameter? You know, object is a parent class of all the classes. So if show method has got object as a parameter, that means while calling show, we can pass any child class of object. You know that already. We have discussed a lot about that. So SOP ref. So show method will take any child class of object that will be collected in the ref upcasting and SOP ref. ToString method of that particular class will be called. So show new string hello. Show new string hello. Perfectly fine. Show new array list. Okay. Show new linked list. Okay. Why okay? Because string, array list, linked list, all these classes are derived from object. But then int num is equal to 10, show num. That was not possible. Why it was not possible? I'm saying it was not possible. Huh? I'm not saying it is not possible. There's a big difference between that. It was not possible at that time. In the first version
is primitive type.
Yeah. So it was not possible because object is a reference type and num is primitive int. But then somehow programmers wanted to make it possible, or somehow Java people wanted to make it possible. Good, possible. Let's try passing num to object. We have to make it possible. They said. So uske liye what they did, they derived a new idea of wrapper class. So solution wrapper classes were introduced. Above program can be now written as show object as it is, new string, array list, linked list, anything can be passed because all are child classes. Num, they could not pass. So what they did? They introduced wrapper class integer. Now wrapper class integer ob is equal to new integer num. This is the way integer wraps int. Num is int and integer class is wrapper class. So how do you wrap primitive inside a wrapper? You have to create object of integer. Sorry, you had to create object of integer and pass primitive, that is int. That way you could wrap primitive with the help of wrapper class. So integer ob is equal to new integer num. That means integer will wrap num, ob will wrap num, and that OB you pass. That OB you pass. Now you can pass OB because OB is the reference of integer and integer is the child class of object. So that is the reason wrapper classes were introduced. Look at this note. Look at this part. Try to understand why it was not possible to pass num to that method where object is a parameter. And then look at the solution. First, to understand that. Why I'm showing you this because, and why I'm giving you time to understand this because interview question. Why wrapper classes were introduced? You have to explain this point. You have to explain what was the problem when Java started. At that time, what was the problem? तो ये scenario आपको describe करना है. And then you have to talk about solution. So we could not pass num because num is primitive and argument is object. So it was not possible. It was not possible. I repeat again, I'm saying it was not possible. I'm not saying it is not possible. It was not possible. Because now in current version, the scenario is something different that we will talk about. So wrapper classes were introduced. How exactly we could use wrapper classes like this. Look at this. So prior to Java 5 version, people had to pass primitive to that method where object was a parameter like this. Every primitive. Suppose you need to pass float. Float, I'm talking about primitive. So again, you have to create object of float wrapper class, pass that float primitive and pass that float wrapper class to object. So every primitive you had to pass like that. You had to pass like that. Is that point clear? Wrapper class ka use. So this is the way you have to explain when the question is asked. Why wrapper class? Why? Okay. Now there are wrapper classes demos. Okay, we have got some demos. How do you wrap primitive inside wrapper class? We have already checked that. But once again, int num is equal to 100, integer OB is equal to new integer num, and SOP OB. So how do you wrap primitive inside wrapper class? You have to create object of that wrapper class and pass that num. SOP OB. SOP OB. Now OB is a reference of integer, and when you say SOP OB, you will get proper output, readable output. Why? Thanks to toString method inside integer class. ToString method inside integer class. Correct? Again, integer, all wrapper classes are immutable. That means once you pass this num, this OB will never change. Huh? OB will never change. There is no setter method. OB.set something, no.
Is it same like a string? Because
same like string because it is immutable, but it does not have any pool wool. Pool wool ka concept nahi hai.
means
That concept is only with the string.
All the data will store in the stack. Either we can create using the wrapper cache class. Oh, sorry, the heap, sir, heap.
Either see, एक minute. It is same like string because it is immutable. Number one, string में difference क्या है? String has got that string pool and all those concepts. This is not there for wrapper class. This is same as you know what immutable demo we saw. Immutable demo देखा था हमने before discussing string. Yes or no?
Yes sir.
वही logic. There is no setter method. In fact, there are some more things for immutability that we are going to discuss. Maybe not today, on Monday. Immutability के लिए not just one requirement. So far we have discussed one requirement. Don't provide setter method and class becomes immutable. But not just that, there are a lot of other things also. So those we will discuss on Monday. So now you understand that wrapper classes are immutable because they don't have setter methods. So once you create, that value is fixed.
So like string, if we perform any action on this, so it will create new object to store that result.
But it does not have those methods. I mean, methods is messy. ऐसे methods नहीं. String we need ना. String is suppose hello to uppercase, to lowercase, substring. So string का requirement is different and wrapper classes का requirement is different. Wrapper classes का whole and sole purpose is to wrap primitive and pass to that method where object is a parameter.